Stanzas on the Middle Way with commentary by Gyel-tsap. Chapter 11. Refuting Truly Existent Time. Assertion of Vaidantikas and other proponents of permanent time, though it is correct to admit that a permanent self does not exist since it is not established by either direct or inferential cognition, permanent functional things are not non-existent since there is permanent time. Though water, manure, seeds and so forth are present, one observes that sprouts, flowers and the like are not produced at certain times but are produced at others. From this one can infer the presence of another cause which is time. Though it is a permanent entity different from the functional things which exist in the three times, it is revealed in terms of instants, moments, brief spans, and so forth.
Answer: this is unacceptable, for if time were an entity different from functional things it should be perceived, but it is not perceived. That has already been refuted. In this context the refutation is made taking a future pot to represent future time. The same should be understood with respect to the other two times. It follows that the present pot does not exist in the future pot, nor does the past pot exist at that time, for if they both existed at that time, time would be disrupted, since things which are to occur later would already exist at an earlier time. Also at any one time another cannot exist. For these reasons, since both the past and present would be future if they existed at the time of the future pot, they do not already exist at that time. If the future of the future existed by way of its own entity, it should be future. In that case, since all three times would have to be future, there could not be any past or present. If that were so, the future itself would not exist, since it could not be posited as future in relation to anything. Assertion: the past pot is not altogether non-existent in the future pot. Since there is a part of it which has not yet come into existence as an entity that has occurred, there is no error.
Answer: if at the time of the future pot, the disintegrated pot existed in the future as an entity which had not yet come into existence, it would follow that the past pot was future because of being, by way of its own entity, that which had not yet occurred at the time of the future pot. If this is accepted, it follows that there would be no past. This would necessarily be so, for how could anything that truly existed as future in nature become past? It is contradictory. Moreover, by virtue of this reasoning, if the future in relation to the pot is asserted as truly existent, it must be accepted as being only future, which undermines the contention. If, according to proponents of permanent time, future things exist, it follows that the future pot is present because of already being in the nature of a future substantially existent thing. If something exists as a substantially established entity, it must be present since it has been produced and has not disintegrated. If this is accepted, it follows that it cannot be future. If, as asserted by Vaidantikas, Vaidantikas, and so forth, things existent by way of their own character exist in the future, exist in the past and exist in the present, what part of a thing could ever not exist? How can there be impermanence for a proponent of substantially existent time? It follows that there cannot be any impermanent things, for if all three times are substantially existent, whatever exists at an earlier time must be accepted as existing later, and whatever exists at a later time must be accepted as existing earlier.
The future is not substantially existent since future time cannot exist in the future. Similarly, has the past passed beyond its own nature as the past or not? In the first case, why is it the past? It follows that it is not the past because of having passed beyond and gone from the past, just as curd which is no longer milk cannot be called milk, and a youth who has left childhood behind cannot be called a child. In the second case, for what reason is it the past? It follows that it is not the past, for it has not passed beyond being a past substantial entity but continues to exist as a substantial entity performing a function. Regarding Vaidantikas and so forth who assert that there is a common locus of a pot in the future, if a produced future pot exists, why is it not present? It follows that it should be, because it has been produced and has not ceased. If it is not produced, is the future pot permanent or what? It follows that it should be permanent because of being an unproduced thing. Assertion: although the future is unproduced, causes and conditions make it become the present, thus it is not permanent.
Answer: if even though the future is not produced, the future pot is impermanent because it subsequently disintegrates, in that it undergoes change, why not consider the past pot permanent since it does not disintegrate? It follows that it is permanent because of being a thing which does not disintegrate. Alternatively, what is impermanent according to you? The past and present are not impermanent because the past cannot disintegrate. If the present is impermanent by way of its own entity, through its subsequent connection with disintegration, it follows that disintegration, too, is impermanent, or that the present is permanent because of its connection with disintegration which is permanent. Since the third, which is different from both the past and present, namely the future, also is not impermanent, there is nothing impermanent for proponents of inherently existent things. Thus it is inappropriate for them to assert the existence of time. Assertion: future things exist because they are produced later when the conditions obtain. That which is previously non-existent, like a barren woman's child, will not be produced later.
Answer: if a thing to be produced later is substantially existent prior to its production, the contention that things are inherently established as causeless held by naivetividents and those asserting that things are not created by people's activity and are without cause is not erroneous. Yet their assertions are wrong, for they contradict everything that is both seen and unseen. Moreover, even if the future were substantially existent, it would be unreasonable to say that a thing which will be made to occur later is substantially existent prior to its production. If that which already exists is produced later, what has already been produced will come into existence again, which is purposeless. As a consequence, the effect would find no opportunity for production, since the cause must reproduce itself until the end. Assertion: the future exists because there is yogic perception of wished-for objects which focuses on future things, and because predictions concerning the future are later seen to turn out just as predicted. This is impossible in relation to a barren woman's child. Answer: